Hello and welcome to the December program of the Academy of the North American Unitarian Association. The NAUA is dedicated to supporting and promoting the practice of liberal religion by embracing freedom, reason, and tolerance, rooted in our commitment to the inherent worth and dignity of every person and all peoples. The NAUA Academy offers monthly programs um, on issues of concern in contemporary society from our liberal religious perspective. My name is Stephen Palmer, and I am a member of the NAUA Academy Advisory Board. I'm joining you from Woodbridge, Connecticut. If you are willing, and I hope you will do so, if you can, if you'd like to add your name and location to your indication, you can do so by clicking on the three buttons next to your name in the participants list, or on the three buttons next to your picture. We are becoming a global organization with participants and members joining from multiple continents. And it is interesting to see the geographic spread of our audience tonight. You may, excuse me, today our speaker is the Reverend Peter Morales. Reverend Morales served as president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, UUA, from 2009 until 2017. Before becoming UUA president, he was the senior minister at Jefferson Unitarian Church in Colorado. During his tenure, Jefferson became one of the fastest growing Unitarian Universalist congregations in the denomination. Before entering the ministry, he was an editor and publisher of a community newspaper in Oregon. In addition, he has lived abroad as a Fulbright lecturer in Spain and as a Knight International Press Fellow in Peru. Peter lives in Western Washington State with his wife, Phyllis. Now, as we mentioned earlier, we are recording Reverend Morales' presentation. The presentation will take about 45 minutes to an hour. That recording will be available soon on the NAUA websites, naunitarians.org, and it's on the Academy page at the bottom with the videos. It will also be available on YouTube. After Reverend Morales' presentation, we will then move to a question and answer period of about 20 or 30 minutes, depending upon the interest and activity of questions. Following that, we'll have some breakout rooms of about another half hour for folks to discuss the presentation or just get to know each other. If you do not want to be recorded while asking a question, you may type your question into the chat and I will ask the question for you. During the presentation, I ask that you remain muted, and considering the large number of participants that we have for this particular program, it may be helpful, and I recommend it to shut off your camera. It's the icon at the lower left of your Zoom screen, and that will help save bandwidth and avoid freezing of the image during the presentation. In some areas, bandwidth is definitely an issue. The title of Reverend Morales' presentation today is, quote, "Liberal Religion, Is It Time for Hospice?" question mark. So without further ado, it is my pleasure and indeed my honor to turn the program over to Reverend Peter Morales. Reverend Morales, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Stephen, and thank you to the NAU for hosting this, and I'm really quite uh, blown away by the number of people who've showed up. Um, I was, as you mentioned, a once a editor of a local newspaper, and uh, that's where I honed my headline writing, provocative headline writing skills. So the Time for Hospices uh, was hopefully a way of perking some interest. What and I what I want to do in this presentation is take um, a very broad view of where liberal religion is uh, in North America and even beyond, um, and uh, take some look at how we got into this situation. Um, I think future historians will look at the era we're in and see it as one undoubtedly is a in terms of religious history of a great transition from uh, perhaps not the Reformation, but something uh, like the Great Awakening or one of these big historical shifts that happen. Um, I will then look at what I see is the current need for religious community and spiritual community, which I believe is acute, and I'll go into that in some detail, and explore very tentatively uh, and really encourage exploration of some alternatives that we might uh, look at to respond to the need uh, that's all around us, and be asking questions around what does liberal religion, what is it uniquely qualified to provide today? And I very much look forward to the questions and answers. I don't, my presentation uh, won't be standard academic lecture length. It'll be briefer than that. I'm really looking forward um, to to hearing from folks and hearing that discussion. I want to begin, however, with just the UUA, something I hadn't seen, and then after agreeing to do this, I should see what the kind of I've been removed from this now for a while, what the recent statistics are in terms of our membership, and I'll ask. I have a slide that shows the last 10, 15 years or so, and if that could be brought up. Okay, there it goes. And what you see, the left-hand column is obviously the year. Then there's number of congregations, it's the second column. The big one is adult members, which is the third column. And the fourth is religious education enrollment. What you'll see there is even from, 2010, 164, it's kind of a high water mark of adult members, and that has dropped over 30,000 uh, people, which is and even more so the religious uh, education enrollment is significantly less than half of what it was uh, 15 years ago. Uh, if you if we went back even further, the numbers were quite steady for some time, going up a little bit, about 1% a year, which was really less than population growth in that time. So the movement is actually is a share of American population has been in slow decline and now entered a more rapid decline. Um, I want to take a look at one, perhaps our closest cousin in the religious landscape is the United Church of Christ. And if we could flip to that slide, the chart of the UCC membership um, from 57 to 17. and you can see that they've lost almost two-thirds of their uh, membership. And there are patterns kind of similar for, Lutherans and Methodists and Episcopalians and Presbyterians and others, some doing a little bit better than others. If we then, and I only have 4 slides, so those of you who don't worry about that. I want to show a chart then of the total percent of Americans who are uh, uh, total church membership. This is not it, but can you flip to the one of total church membership? I got them out of order. There it is. And it shows this is amazing going back to the 1930s that uh, very little change within plus or minus 3% going up to the year 2000 and then a significant decline. And we just passed a point where fewer than half of Americans claim any kind of membership in any church at all, um, which is really uh, quite stunning. Um, and then finally, a chart. There was the previous one of the what are called the nuns, people who claim no religious identity at all. If we could pull that one up, it would have been the previous slide. There it is. Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Um, and on a personal level, I remember I'm 78 now. When I was in high school in Texas, uh, I don't recall any of my classmates not having some kind of religious identity. Now, they may not have practiced or their family, they may not have gone to church very often, but they all claim to be either a Baptist or a Methodist or Catholic or Mormon or something. Um, and uh, uh, and when I was in college, it was 95% of all students that age claim some kind of religious identity. Now there's a little blip there at the end. I'm not sure how that changed down to 28% from 31, 32. If it's just a statistical artifact, but just under a third, between a quarter and a third of Americans uh, claim no religious identity. And in fact, as many of you know, the nuns are now the largest single religious group in America. So, uh, and if we look, that's enough of the charts there for a while. Um, Historically, it's amazing how quickly some of these things can happen. I've told a story uh, over the years of 20 some years ago on a vacation in Spain, and we stopped in a small city in northern Spain in the wine region of La Rioja. And my wife and I decided to take the historical walking tour. And on that tour there was supposed to be some interesting art in the chapel of a convent. So we went up, we found it, and there was a gate, and it was closed, but it said to ring the bell. So we rang the bell and waited, and we're going to walk away. And then a little voice came up, and some probably 20-year-old came out, and she was, I guess, a trainee in tourism, and let us in. And it was a cloister. And what was fascinating to me was this cloister had been there for over 400 years, this convent, uh, Carmelite convent. When we asked about it, there were fewer than, I think it was down to 10 or 11 nuns that were still there, the youngest one in her mid 60s, and they hadn't taken an initiate in 30 some years. So uh, if it's still going, it has some very, very old and just a handful of nuns. But to me, it was an image of how when a religious movement loses contact and support, how quickly things um, can change in that way. Um, the UUA, I want to talk a little bit about Unitarian and Universalism and its own attempts um, to grow. When I came into the ministry as a parish minister, I had a kind of enthusiasm of seeing all this possibility. Like so many of my colleagues, I was convinced that that Unitarian Universalism had enormous potential for growth. It aligned with the worldview of so many people that I knew, and people who had drifted away from, as I had, from uh, a more orthodox religious tradition. That's sort of a story that's repeated thousands and thousands uh, of times. And one of the things that as I came in, I saw these efforts because there's a widely held view that we should be bigger. We have all this potential, all of this. Uh, and there were several national uh, attempts, programs to try to boost growth. And some of you will remember uh, some of these. There was the extension ministry program that went for a while, which was a way of subsidizing um, ministers for small congregations. And that had a bit of success for a while. Uh, and then there was oh heavens, the attempt. There was a big deal about mega churches for a while, and that was the future. And so a group at the UUA became convinced, and the leadership became convinced that the was not through small little fellowships and promoting their growth, but rather to start big, start a church that would be have hundreds of people as it rolled out, would have a staff of that a large church had, and it would essentially be planted. And there was this effort to do this in the Dallas area. And I remember uh, at the time serving a congregation that had between 400 and 500 members at the time, and realizing that the startup that had no members had a larger staff than we did, uh, and feeling a little bit of envy about that. But in fact, that went almost nowhere. It was a kind of a bit of a fiasco. Um, and then there was the conviction that we had, uh, and all these have a germ of truth to them. There was this conviction that the problem is that people just don't know about us. If people knew about us, they would beat down the doors uh, because we're such a wonderful organization and place to be. And so there was a lot of fundraising that went on and a big effort and a pilot uh, in the greater Kansas area, Kansas City, Missouri, um, to roll out this big media advertising program. The result was that it ended up temporarily boosting the number of visitors, um, but it had virtually no effect on any membership and no lasting effect on any membership. Um, And now I want to tell something a little personal about my own experience in a congregation. To bring a contrast here that I'll hammer this point home a bit later. So when I went to the congregation I served, marvelous congregation in Colorado, um, I was full of all kinds of ideas of doing outreach because I thought, again, that we had enormous growth potential. But I had to get myself established. There were staffing changes, so this would have uh, to wait. And very early on in that process, in meeting with the membership committee, well, even before that, I started noticing that I made a practice of greeting people before the services. And as I greeted people, yeah, I'm not the best person in the world, far from it, with names and faces, but I kept seeing people I was convinced I hadn't seen before. Uh, and then became fascinated by that. And in talking with the membership committee, it looked like we actually had a fair number of visitors that were coming. And what happened subsequently really changed my entire course in ministry. We decided, just for our own education, to kind of be like a little anthropologist or sociologist and watch what happened from a bit of a distance and just observe very quietly what happened when people visited. And this has become a story I've retold because it was such a formative thing. The truth is, we were appalled. We were absolutely appalled at what happened when people came to visit our congregation. Uh, by and large, they were ignored after having been greeted. They were not engaged in a kind of way. Uh, there was no systematic kind of follow up. So we started trying some simple things to change that, to try to behave in the way we thought we already were behaving, because we had the self image of being just the friendliest people on the planet. And one of the things that then started happening was the effect was dramatic. And that was really the beginning of the growth of that congregation. It was around the practice of hospitality. Uh, in my kind of smarmy way, I started among colleagues arguing that the key to growing Unitarian Universalism was to repel fewer visitors than we had been repelling. Um, and but there was a lot of truth in that. And funny thing that would happen in a congregation is if you get people returning because they had a good experience, and a percentage of those join, and you cut the number who are leaving the congregation marginally, the difference between now you're because most churches lose about 10, 12, 15% of their membership every year. Well, you cut that by a few percent, you up the number who are joining a little bit, and pretty soon you're a different size organization if you just become larger. Among the big learnings, I want to follow up on that, was that what was a the hunger that people felt when they made the decision, which takes a lot of bravery actually, to go visit a strange congregation, uh, was that they were hungry for something, some connection in their lives, and some meaning. And already it was the age of the early internet. Nobody, I realized, I've soon learned, was coming to our congregation to find out what we believed. They knew what we believed. I mean, they'd already passed that. In some ways, used to say that in terms of they've sort of pre-qualified themselves by the time they visited. They weren't fundamentalists coming and then being shocked by this sort of progressive, uh, and often humanistic theology. Uh, not at all. The real question for them was, uh, do I belong here? Does my family belong here? Is this a place for my children? And none of that is sort of left brain cognitive stuff. It is very relational, emotional stuff that's that's going on with that. Um, so, another thing I wanted to mention that was a enormous learning for me uh, was I was lucky enough to land in a congregation that already had a practice of doing an annual survey. And I've often called myself a recovering social scientist. I've never met a spreadsheet or a questionnaire that I didn't like. Uh, and so we had these, and it was a very useful thing, about 20 questions, and had a high return rate. But there was a practice of asking one open-ended question at the end of the survey. And this really became a central aha for me. So the question was, why do you keep coming? Why do you stay as a member of this congregation? And I was not surprised at all when the answer that was given most often was, it's for the community. What did surprise me a bit was that community was cited more often than all other responses combined. Uh, in the, excuse me, there's a saying in the kind of business world that it's really important to know what business you're in and what business you're not in. And in our liberal congregations, in my congregation, I realize we're in the religious community business. It's about the relationships that we have, and that's the foundation for everything else that we do. So, then I went off on that. Another sort of strategy toward the end of my time at the UUA, it seems frankly silly in retrospect, was this belief that some of the leadership and the board got into, that somehow if we change our governance approach, it was going to have all this miraculous effect of unleashing all this energy. And we spent enormous amounts of time and way too much money on trainings around policy governance. And of course, it had no discernible effect other than frustrating a lot of people. So with that context of my own sort of personal experience in the congregation, in national leadership, what I see is the big trends across the religious landscape. What are the possibilities in the future? Um, I think, unfortunately, church, as I knew it growing up, and as people think of just church, it has gone from being something that was a positive and a good thing and something that people did to being a bad brand, frankly. Church has gotten associated with bigotry, with anti-gay stuff, with sexual abuse, with so many things that for younger people, including my children and the children of most people I know, and grown children, it just doesn't have the attraction. There's no perceived need, anything like there was. So I don't think that the possibility for turning that trend around of congregations as we've known them is very good. Uh, and yet, the need is absolutely staggering. And I want to highlight a couple of things on that. Americans today are probably the loneliest people who've ever existed on Earth. Um, and that's not an impression. That's just kind of hard social science. And that's been repeated studies, social psychologists, sociologists have demonstrated that to the point where the Surgeon General called it an epidemic and the equivalent of smoking or obesity. Um, that uh, that and the great irony here is that it's never been easier. I mean, look at the technology we're using. It's never been easier technologically to maintain contact with people. And yet, Americans feel enormously isolated. Some of that has to do with simply demographic shifts. Almost a third of American households today are single person households. I mean, the number of people, and my wife and I were discussing this recently, just where we live, this is an area in the Olympic Peninsula that's popular with retirees, but the number of people in our neighborhood who live alone is really shocking when you start going house uh, to house. So we live in a society where people are alone and they are disconnected. The other huge national trend that's going on is the grisly um, statistics around what is called deaths of despair. The deaths by suicide, alcoholism, drug overdoses um, have spiked horribly. Stat here I have is uh, 400 Americans die every day, or about 150,000 a year, from what are called deaths of despair. Um, it kills 4 times as many people as traffic accidents. Um, so what we have is a situation where the need for real community, where people can share deeply, where they can face the future together, where they can reflect together on what is most meaningful and important in their lives, where they can help raise kids and pass along key values. That the need for that kind of community is measurably higher than it's probably ever been. There's a deep number, and there's a great tension between uh, that need and our inability somehow to adapt to that need and to address it effectively. Um, so, what can we do and what ought we to do? Uh, I I think we have to begin. I think we have to ask the right question and, and the right questions. And the right question, I don't believe any longer is how can we grow our churches? Um, Growing churches is a good thing if it happens, and certainly maintaining them because there are so many wonderful congregations out there that meet our needs. But in terms of a religious group that addresses the pain and the anxiety the religious needs of people, we've got to figure out some other ways of doing things. To simply do what we've been doing clearly doesn't work. And even now, to do what we've always done and even a little bit better isn't going to do it. It isn't going to turn around these big historical trends. Uh, and it's not about, again, about beliefs and being correct, that kind of that cognitive stuff. It's not what we believe in the terms of what we believe is empirically true. Um, so what we have is a situation which I think is a classic, what they call wicked problem, not wicked in terms of evil, but wicked problems are defined as problems for which there is no known solution. There are complicated problems, complicated issues, but there is no, if we want to build a bridge that spans 300 yards over this amount and carry this amount of traffic, we know how to do this. Engineers know how to do that. If we want to do any number of things, the human knowledge base is there. But certain kinds of problems can only be solved by trying to solve them and by trying things. And this is what I believe needs to happen, is a deep kind of soul searching on one level, focusing on what are really our core values or beliefs in terms of everybody matters. I would suggest three, that we start with three. Everybody matters. We're all in this together. I mean, just objectively, what happens to you affects me, and what happens to me affects all of us. And the other one is, it doesn't have to be this way. We have the power to change the way that things are. There's a discipline, it's called design thinking, that I think has some real possibilities. Not that it's a fancy tool, but what it's based upon is the initial step, if you're trying to solve a wicked problem, is you have to immerse yourself in it. The key to that is empathy. Um, to know in depth what what is the hunger of those people who are around us, who are neighbors. How do we address that? How do I define that? And then the other one is to try some things on a small scale and learn from them. When I look back on what worked when I was in the parish, um, is that without having any of this discipline of a of a of a theoretical approach like design thinking, um, but we kept trying things. The people who were involved in, like, in membership or in worship, there was an experimental attitude. So there were a lot of little adjustments that were uh, going on, and we did what happens in all kinds of fields, is we sometimes stuff that we tried didn't work, and we had to stop doing it, which was really uh, hard. So to wrap this introduction, I think that clearly religion and liberal religion is by any objective measure in decline, and in a fairly rapid decline. Um, and among the effects isn't that the drop in religion is causing suicides and is causing loneliness, but one of the things that we are able to do as a religious institution is address those needs for spiritual community. If I am dedicated toward environmental justice and justice for migrants in the world, and a racial justice, I have a lot of organizations among which I can choose to support and donate to and make a difference. Um, However, in terms of creating a real deep community, something that enriches our lives, political organizations, public policy organizations don't do that. Religious organizations do. I think that if we're to have any kind of future that's at all something like healthy, we have to focus on that. Not that we don't express concerns over environmental justice and all the other justice issues. Of course we do. You know, I'm a guy who's been to jail a couple of times protesting. I got to be a guest of Joe Arpaio in Phoenix at his county jail, and am personally committed to all kinds of things. And yet, that is not the core of what I think a progressive religious organization is. And part of it is I think we have to move and explore beyond the congregation as the form. Uh, Not that it goes away in the same way that desktop computers don't go away, but they're these things. They're all, I mean, there's so many ways of doing the same thing. That's an analogy. So to wrap up, the future, if we keep doing the kind of things we've tried, I think is bleak. And yet the need for what we do at our best is enormous. It is historic. And the tasks before us uh, in our little ways in expanding isn't to save souls the way they thought hundreds of years ago, but it's really to save lives. Um, and um, and and is to heal the disconnection that mobility and all these things have created in modern life. It's just to find ways to help people reconnect and to build a common future. So uh, with that, I invite questions and comments. Um, how are we doing? We're okay. All right, time-wise.
We're doing fine. And uh, Terry, if you would like to, we'd like to give Reverend Morales a break for a minute or so before the questions start. Do you have a slide or so that you'd like to show? I think of some of our future programs. Okay, so this is just to let you know what's on the menu at NAUA. Uh, we will have our monthly worship service on the 21st, which will be a winter solstice theme. And the sermon will be by Reverend Twinkle Marie Manning. And then we have a usual program with Reverend Jack Reich, which is called Anything Goes. And that's a regular monthly program. And then as we go into January, we have a very provocative program with Dr. Mark Reimers, who's spoken with us before. And that will be on the issue of societies that almost got it right. I think this time we're not quite sure what's going on with our society, but Dr. Reimers believes that there were a number of societies in the past that did rather well. And the International Alliance will be starting another series of programs which will meet monthly. I think the starting date is going to be a Saturday, the second Saturday of each month. It is on mythology now and then. How can it inform our future? And that is going to be a multi-session course. I think it's going to run 4 or 5 sessions, and it will be with Marga Hanna and also with Wayne Hanna. And so this is just a few of the things that we have on our menu for the next month or so. And If you want more information or are interested in possibly supporting some of our programs, you can find that on our NA Unitarian website, naunitarian.org, or North American Unitarians. And here's one of those funny codes. With that, I think we can move into our our question and answer session. Now, to do that in some form of organized fashion, there's a react button. It's a heart, at least on my screen, at the bottom of your screen. Um, and if you click on that, you will see a raise hand button. And if you raise your hand, then it will appear on the screen where I will be able to see it. And I will call on you and you will be able to ask your question. I would urge you to try to keep your question fairly brief so that we can get as many questions and answers in the available time. So why don't we just start? If you can see the raise hand button, we can get started. Let's see. Perhaps
What you need to.
I'm not seeing the raise hand button, unfortunately.
Mark Reimer has his hand up first, I think.
Okay, can you see it, Terry?
Yes. Go ahead, Mark.
Hi, thank you, Peter, and thank you, everyone, for putting this on. One question that I have is, what kind of institutions can support the mission to meet this need for community, an aspirational community to build our best selves? Can you comment on what kind of institutions, and whether, if churches are disappearing, what those institutions might look like?
Oh, great questions. And one possibility, but it has proved enormously difficult, is for the huge resources that exist among religious institutions, liberal institutions that are already there, to try to adapt and change in such a way that addresses the needs that are there much more effectively than they have. Sadly, that has proved enormously difficult to do. It has at the UUA, the programs on retraining ministers, of supporting entrepreneurial ministry and training that way. It proved much tougher than I wish they had. And it involves, part of it involves recruiting the kind of leaders that are needed to do that. So I think that's one of the areas that needs exploring by people, is how, and maybe an association of congregations that are committed to this might work. We need to try some different kinds of stuff. The normal denominational bodies that I know are simply have not shown the ability to adapt. I hate to say that.
Okay. Thank you. I think Jake Kiskell has his hand up next.
I
Jay,
do.
good to see you.
It's great to see you too. Well, I want to thank you. I think you're spot on with your understanding about the structure of congregational life and how it stands today. And I'll make one observation about the current association. It appears they are not building, but basically going through and seeking to dismantle and dispose of anything they don't find akin to their current thinking. So that's the ideological approach. And I think that's going to be a failure, as well as any other approach that is, I think, more kinder and more gentler. My hope, as you said, you call them spiritual communities. I'll call them religious communities. But those types of communities build a certain type of trust that is completely absent from wherever you are, whether it's in your homeowners association or your coffee clutch or anything like that. That there's something special about that relationship you have and that identity, not only with those people in your community, excuse me, but those who also pull themselves among that community. Forgive me. I'll be brief and just make one example of what I'm saying. So last summer, I'm riding my bicycle down the west coast of the United States, from Canada down to Mexico. Great adventure. And my beautiful wife was driving the Prius with her camping equipment as I rode my bike. And she was the one that had to find campsite or hotels at the end of the day. Well, we ended up, I think it's in Half Moon Bay, California. No viable campsite, no viable hotel. And so Helen just picks up the phone, finds the local UU congregation in that city, leaves a message in the office saying we're two UUs traveling and need a place to stay. Within 30 minutes, she gets a phone call back, and a woman is offering her home to us, total strangers, based only that we are in this UU community. And to make it more astounding, she said, well, I will not be there when you arrive, but I'll leave the key under the front mat. That is really the essence of what community is. And I think that's what we should work for our congregations to be, a place of community. And let the ideology sort itself out. But there are core values that unite us in that community, that make us special and unite us in a way that I find just warming and unique. And thank you for your talk. It's just excellent, Peter.
Well, I think Jay probably didn't quite say it all, but said an awful lot. And I think that's very, very, very meaningful to all of us. I think Dick Burkhart has his hand up. Dick from Seattle. There you go.
Yeah,
Go, Dick.
I agree with what Jay, some of the others have said, especially what you said about building a deep spiritual community, Peter, because the UUA now has gone whole hog on what you might call, what's often called woke identity politics or woke ideology. And I think that says, especially the description as woke identity politics says a lot. It's based on political passions more than anything else, and it's trying to achieve its goals by forming community by a new kind of conformity around these political or partisan kinds of positions. You know, they pick good goals, racial justice and everything else like that. But you look at their methods. This is my sort of key question here. Their methods, I say, are based on conformity and censorship and sometimes cancel culture and kind of a narrow-minded, trying to enforce a narrow-minded focus on ideology to get the community you're talking about. And so how do we, as we try to find a community, how do we avoid that kind of thing? And it strikes me as that maybe instead of a narrow-minded approach, we should approach a questioning approach. Because if we can learn to question freely, even in asking, questions some people say you shouldn't be asking, I think that's the way to build the kind of trust that Jay was just talking about. We can learn to trust each other's questioning. What do you think?
Peter, do you have a response to Dick?
A quick one. One of the things that, and I'll say, I'm not without sin in this, in the old kind of Christian way, that part of the problem is that self-righteousness feels so good, and righteous indignation is such an exhilarating thing. The downside is the effects of it are terrible. It alienates people who should be your allies, and I think we've seen a lot of that happen. And then let me add one other thing. This is as a practice. any relationship that I've been in with another person, if you ask us to reflect on those times when we were most angry with the other person, or most disappointed, what will happen? We will relive uh, that time and probably start doing things like assigning blame for what happened. Um, and it goes nowhere. If you ask people what values do you share and what do you think you might do together, you get a very different kind of conversation. And we've spent way too much time in terms of who's to blame for what and who did what to whom, and as opposed to, all right, how do we together build the kind of world that actually we all say we want to build? It's amazing the power of asking the right question.
Okay, I'm trying to see here. We have a lots of answers. Is that, oh, there we go. Lewis, go ahead, Lewis.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Morales. I really enjoyed your talk, and
Yeah.
it hits home. For me, what hits home is this: how deep the need is that's not being met. Um, I'm wondering if by having a sermon, we're squandering our limited, valuable time together, right? If the purpose is building a community and understand each other, taking the first 30 minutes of it and having one person lecture at a passive audience. And of course, we do have an alternative model, right? Which I guess Parker Palmer has the circles of trust, and we have the chalice circles. What do you think about the model of starting with the circle? Throw out the sermon, start with the circle, start with the conversation for people trying to understand each other.
I guess in that sort of experimental thing, I'd be willing to try that or more of that. My limited experience in is that it's not either or. You can have both. I mean, there's something about the whole group coming together and focusing on an issue, and hopefully it's not a lecture, and then there being space to discuss that and other things. I think you can have both. And it's also true that clearly the ham sandwich, as it's called, has some limitations. Part of it is when people were expected to go to church much more, and it was routine. You just did it. There's uh, there's no market for mediocrity today. So in terms of worship services, you know, if it's not done at a certain level of thoughtfulness and quality, people will drift away.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there's a certain amount of community building that comes from just showing up, and when that culture is gone, then it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Before we move on to my friend uh, Ron Strange, I just wanted to throw in a thought. One of the things that the NAUA has been doing, because we are restricted to largely Zoom types of communication, is that we offer what would be considered a menu of different things, different programs. We have small groups, circles, we have lectures, we have study groups and multi session programs. And so we're sort of trying to offer a menu that people can select what they're interested in. The challenge that we have, so we are not a fried chicken joint, in which there's only one thing on the menu, and you might think the UUA is sort of like a fried chicken joint. This is sort of what we have, and if you don't want this, you don't belong here. Whereas we have a rather broad spectrum of educational opportunities. The thing that we struggle with is the issue of how do we build community, and we are well aware of the fact that we can't do it solely online. I wonder if you have any thoughts or suggestions.
I wish I had the answers to these things, because the the technology giveth and the technology taketh away. I mean, it allows people to have contact, but it's a kind of it's you need the personal interaction. So I'm believing more and more as I reflect that whether it's through a congregation or other forms, about the importance of working on simply building trusting, cooperative, sharing relationships where we are, and to break those barriers of isolation, which lead to suspicion uh, of other people.
Hmm.
No, when you have the answer, call me.
Well, thank you. I think Ron and his group in Salage C uh, are starting to have some of that answer. Ron, go ahead.
Well, Stephen, you've kind of almost stolen my question because, we had the privilege of having Peter a few months ago here in Port Townsend, and what a wonderful meeting it was. And I'm seeing paradoxes and ironies here that I know, Peter, that you can solve for me. We have at the one time the epidemic levels of loneliness that you're talking about, and at the same time a decrease in church membership and people wanting to be in physical community with each other. That seems to be paradoxical. I'm going to criticize the virtual world, even though we're benefiting from it right now, and we wouldn't be together if it wasn't for this. So we have this, in the last 20 years or so, this massive increase in social media, this virtual world, and people saying they have likes and they have friends and they have community. And it's seeming to me that it might be like eating Wonder Bread. You can be overfed and undernourished at the same time. So, your comments about this dilemma with the virtual community.
Yeah, I don't have an easy answer. Again, I'll repeat. I think you have to do both. I don't think virtual community can ever be enough. And I love using this technology to meet regularly with colleagues that I haven't seen and are across the country, and with my friends and children and relatives. So in some ways, it allows you to maintain in between times of actually being physically together. And so it's a balancing act, I think, and we really need to experiment in the best way into this future. How do you blend the two? And you know when it's working, and you know when it's not working, and you go with that.
Okay, Sean, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So I really resonated with the part where you were talking about how people are coming to church for community and for connection. That was certainly true in my case. At the same time, I'm kind of looking at what happened with the UUA and thinking, is a spiritual growth organization stable? Is it susceptible to being taken over by intolerant ideologies? And from that point of view, maybe it's better to actually have a central, not ideology, but belief system, rather than trying to be a big tent that, includes humanists and pagans and Christians. And, if I was thinking about joining a fellowship or starting one, I'd be tempted to just make it really clear from the outset that it was based on humanism and values of freedom of conscience and uh, promoting discussion um, and dialogue among people.
The difficulty with organizing around beliefs is that you get the history of Protestantism, which is, one schism after another, because people can't agree on how to interpret these texts in Matthew or Mark, and you have the different, and it's a very human trait. I mean, you go the other way and look at the battles that the communist world have had over interpreting Marx and Engels, and our history religiously of killing each other because so and so doesn't believe the right thing. So organizing around belief is has a half-life like radioactive stuff. Eventually it breaks down, just historically.
Thank you.
Because some people just won't agree with me is the problem. If they would agree to follow my beliefs, then it'd be a lot simpler.
Good. Thank you. Okay, Tim, and then we're going to start to run toward the end of our program. I want to get as many, excuse me, to the end of our Q&A session. I want to get as many people in as possible. So I have, after Tim, there was, I think James was next, and then Sean and Mark, and I think, if you've asked a question, maybe maybe you can let someone else get ahead of you. I'm just trying to give everybody a chance. Go ahead, Tim.
Well, I'll just be really brief. I guess
No.
can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
I just want to maybe push back against this a little bit. It does seem to me, though, that religions that grow, religious communities that grow, do have some kind of central message. Maybe you don't want to call it a belief if you're a liberal religion. You want to call it something else. You could call it principles, I guess, or something, because if you're just saying that your church is anything goes, what kind of community is that? And there are a rich set of liberal principles that could be a saving message. And it seems to me one problem we ran into is that you use and their urge to somehow attract more people and grow membership said, well, there are all kinds of UUs, but a lot of people, their primary identity, religious identity, was they were a Buddhist UU, a pagan UU, some other variation of UU. That's where they got their meaning, this other thing. And they happen to go to a UU church because there's no other place to go in the community, right? So I guess, do you think we need any kind of central message, even if you don't want it to be as religious as rigid as a creed? What's the unifying message of a liberal religion? What is it?
A couple of things, and I want to give other people in here, so I have a whole sermon on this, of course. I mean, but if you look historically at religion, the centrality of belief is actually a very modern thing. It really comes with a Reformation. Religious groups historically have been almost like a national or ethnic group, and so saying that you had to believe this or that or the other and arguing about beliefs is really much more important in the last 500 years. And I'd love to give the examples, what do Buddhists believe? I mean, Buddhists don't have any beliefs at all. In the way that you thought that we in the West talk about beliefs. So I think you can talk about central values and affirmations. And I think you can do that. But the belief in terms of proposition to which you say, I agree with this proposition, uh, I think leads to division historically. I just think that's what happens with it. But you know, um, better let some other people get in here. I can do a whole harangue on this.
Okay. I think if on the screen, I think James Troiani was next, and then Sean after that. Could we just do that if that's okay? Okay, there's James. James, you're muted. You have to unmute. No,
I did it. Okay.
there you are.
Okay. I'm James Toriani. I'm from Milford, Connecticut, right near Stephen. And I'm with the UU Church in Greater Bridgeport, which is in Stratford, Connecticut. Our church does not have a minister. In a lot of ways, I think that is positive because to listen to the same person every week really can get boring, unless it's Norman Vincent Peale who tells you what you want to hear. And then an earlier speaker said that he was getting tired of the woke stuff. I'm going to be 80, never voted Republican in my life, and I'm getting uncomfortable with the politics I see in the church. I'm extremely upset by what happened to Todd Eckloff. Who could believe that Unitarians burn books? I think having a lay congregation makes it more interesting because we get a different person every week. I think, from what I've heard, there's a problem with a lot of the young ministers coming into the church who are totally into this woke politics. And the woke politics, like example about race. I'm old enough to remember America in the 1950s. And a lot of these people are acting like we're still in the Jim Crow era. They think only police kill blacks. I'm sure Stephen, with me, listened to the Connecticut television stations, and there's a murder almost every day in Bridgeport, New Haven, or Hartford. It's like 500, 600 to 1 compared to the police. I just wish that everybody could be. I don't think a racist would be comfortable in UUA, but I was a delegate to the convention, and I think some of these people were crazy. For example, an elderly woman, you had to describe yourself for the benefit of the blind people. So some elderly woman says, I have fair skin. They immediately apologize for her racism. This is turning people off.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, James. Reverend Morales, would you like to
Just go to the next person. I don't.
Let's we want to get as many people in now. I think
Thank you.
I sort of pushed Sean out of the way there because our screen got a little mixed up. So let's please have Sean from Monterey. Can you?
No, I already spoke. I put my hand down. Go to the next
Oh, I
person.
see. Okay, I'm sorry. The limits of technology. We have Paul Liebert and Marcia from. Oh yeah. Okay.
Well, I think we had Julie first and I brought
Okay,
her.
there's Julie.
And
Terry, if you can see this better than I can, my screen is moving around too much.
okay.
to
Okay.
get
And
the
Stephen
order.
and Todd Eckloff wanted to say a final word.
Yes. As I wanted just to get a few more comments and then have Reverend Eckloff say a few words.
Okay. Go ahead, Julie, and you're muted.
And
I was interested in your comment of what blocks community because I think a lot of problems are best solved not by going there as a goal directly, but by removing the obstacles, because sometimes we've got big obstacles in the way. And one thing you did note was that if visitors to the church are ignored, you got a problem. That is definitely an obstacle. You also mentioned uh, how important it is what questions you ask or what questions you don't ask too. Maybe certain questions get in the way. You mentioned not maybe you shouldn't ask all about people's disappointment and anger, which I agree with. And I also think maybe it's important not to block people's disappointment and anger too, if they've got it. And I think we might learn a lot by looking at things that are blocked. You know, some people don't want to just go forward so much that they don't think anybody needs to grieve, for example, or some of the NAUA groups don't discuss politics, and that may be a good rule, or it may not, or it may depend on the group. But there are a lot of things that you can look at that if you say them, maybe people like that don't want to hear them. So there is some censoring of various types, maybe useful, maybe not. And I'm wondering what you think about what obstacles there are to connection, to keeping people from having a a group that connects well or from connecting with each other.
A lot of questions there.
Yeah, that's a huge one. And rather than go on and on, let me mention a couple of things. One of the things that has struck me as I look back on my own life and having lived abroad is how we have unintentionally created more in the United States than in most places patterns of life that separate people. An example of that I use is the main interaction I have with other people is that they're in my way. They're in my way when I'm driving, they're in my way at the bank, they're in my way at the grocery store. And then it's self-checkout. You know, it's a kind of structure and drive in our cars, which isolate us from the other. When I've been in Mexico or Peru or, for example, Spain, there's just so much in a day-to-day life of face-to-face interactions with people. And I think we pay a huge price for a lot of this suburban and none of this was intentional. But we have to consciously break those barriers that we've created among people. That's one thought, but I'm hit by that so often is how you can spend a day here, and in urban areas, it's really, and don't make eye contact uh, and over time that has a really profound negative effect on people.
That's very profound in Europe in particular, where we spend 5 months out of the year, where people live together, and the distance between people is measured in millimeters, not in meters. Let's have Paul have the last comment, and then Reverend Todd Eckloff, would like to say a few words after that. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, great. So you saved the best for last, other than Todd.
Of course.
Okay.
Well, no, you're next to last.
Okay, so here's my thoughts. I am totally unimpressed with the trend data about the declining attendance in churches, declining attendance at liberal religious institutions. It is, truthfully, the perfect time to build from the bottom, not trying to change existing congregations. Most of them are lost. They're all woke. 90% of them are woke. They're lost. Somebody should do the memorial for them. It's the time to build small congregations, lay-led congregations. 15 people, 20 people, 25 people. We can't do it virtually. People want to touch other people and to be touched. Now his role, pick 3 locations around the country. Support those congregations. Support those small groups that are going to create a new Unitarianism based on not beliefs, but on 7 principles. Some of you may have heard of them. Okay? We don't have to reinvent our theology. It's beautiful. They're beautiful. They've been gutted. What craziness. So I asked Todd and I asked the other leaders of NAWA, find some promising people, groups in Olympic Peninsula, South Florida, Bennington, Vermont, and just work to create small congregations. Build from the bottom up. It's the perfect time to do it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Peter. And
Not Peter. I'm Paul.
excuse me. Sorry.
Peter was the minister who talked earlier.
Okay. Yes. Well, Paul and Peter, you sort of get those confused every once in a while. Anyway, Reverend Morales, would you want a word to that, or shall we turn it over to Todd?
Turn it over to Todd.
Perfect.
Hi,
It's Todd.
Hey, Reverend Peter, it seems like every time we meet, I'm thanking you for the great honor of your presence. And I think this is the second time.
Your second time now.
You probably recall, I hope you do, about back in 2012, I think you remoted in via Zoom to say a few words at our church's 125th
I remember that.
time. Yes, thank you for remembering. Anyway, it was such an honor to have you. It was so kind of you to take time from your schedule all the way across the country. And it was late at night for you.
Oh, happy to do it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And so here I am again. There's been lots of conversation about your presentation, so I don't need to comment on that. I really just wanted to take just a few seconds to thank you again for the honor of your presence. Your work with the Unitarian Universalist Association was greatly appreciated for the almost 8 years that you were there. And I just want to thank you for all that you have meant to our liberal religion and to just how much it means to have you with us tonight. So thank you for your presence and your gift.
Thank you for having me. I've often joked, but there's too much truth in it. We all have burdens to bear. Mine is that I'm a bottomless pit of opinion. And so thank you for letting me share some of them. It was an honor to be asked. So thank you very much. And with that, we'll go to your breakouts, I guess.